Welcome in, everybody. Grab a seat and let's get started. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here in our virtual lecture hall for today's explainer. Now, today we are taking on a massive historical misconception. As your professor for this session, my main goal is to completely dismantle this myth of total European domination in the colonial era of Latin America. We so often hear this one-sided story of a passive conquest. But today, we're going to uncover the incredible, dynamic strategies of cultural resilience that Indigenous and African populations actively used to protect their heritage, their freedom, and ultimately, their lives. Okay, here is our roadmap for today's syllabus. We're going to start with the pre-colonial baseline, move into the architecture of resistance, and explore hiding in plain sight. Then we'll do a masterclass case study on San Basilio de Palenque, check out their networks of survival, and wrap up with their living legacy. All right, Section 1, the pre-colonial baseline, a legacy of sophistication. Let's set the stage. We've all heard the myth, right? The narrative pushed by colonizers that they were arriving to this empty, uncivilized wilderness, just waiting to be claimed. Well, scratch that. Historical reality tells a completely different story. The Americas were a highly managed landscape filled with societal complexity that literally rivaled ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. We are talking about massive urban centers, intricate trade routes, and incredibly organized societies. I mean, just think about what they were doing long before any European ships showed up. The Maya, the Inca, the Olmecs, they achieved staggering intellectual and agricultural feats. They domesticated maize way back around 1200 BCE, which basically fueled a massive population boom. They developed advanced math, including the concept of zero, highly accurate astronomical calendars, and, get this, the only known written language in the Western Hemisphere. And down in the high Andes, the Inca were engineering these mind-blowing terraced farms right on the sides of mountains and building vast road networks. This was a world of profound innovation. Moving right along to Section 2, the architecture of resistance, defying the encomienda. So the Spanish arrive and they implement this system called the encomienda. Let's think about what this actually means. It granted colonizers a monopoly on indigenous labor. Now, sure, it was packaged as a system of protection, but it rapidly devolved into flat-out communal slavery. Indigenous populations were forced into incredibly dangerous work like the infamous silver mines of Potosi. Being sent there was basically a death sentence. So obviously this brutal exploitation sparked an urgent vital need for resistance. And resist they did. Instead of that narrative of total defeat, we see these brilliant, active strategies, forming an architecture of cultural survival. They fought back fiercely with military force and guerrilla warfare, tactics that, by the way, are still echoed today by groups like the Zapatistas in Mexico. When fighting wasn't feasible, they fled. They migrated deep into the Amazon or high into the mountains to set up isolated communities. They also played this really smart game of cultural cloaking. Outwardly, they'd adopt Catholicism to appease the Spanish, but secretly, they practiced their native religions. And they learned Spanish to navigate the colonial system, while fiercely preserving languages like Quechua and Nahuatl behind closed doors. Which brings us perfectly to Section 3, hiding in plain sight, flight and syncretism. Put yourself in their shoes for a second. Imagine your sacred sites are completely destroyed. Colonial churches are built directly on top of the rubble, and the Spanish Inquisition is viciously hunting down any sign of your ancestral faith. How do you survive that? Well, you adapt. You hide your truth in plain sight. Take a look at the Virgin of Guadalupe. To the Spanish colonizers, she clearly represents the Catholic Virgin Mary. Simple enough. But to indigenous populations, there was a much deeper reality at play. Notice how she wears that blue-green mantle? That's a color deeply associated with Mesoamerican deities like Ometecutli and Omecihuatl. And the rays of light behind her, they echo the Magi plant, which was sacred to Mesoamericans. They weren't just assimilating, they were actively encoding their own beliefs right in front of the colonizers. It's truly brilliant. All right, let's jump to Section 4, San Basilio de Palenque, the masterclass case study. You see, the history of Latin America is absolutely also the history of African resistance. Enter the Maroons, or Cimarrones. These were escaped enslaved Africans who flat out refused to accept bondage. They fled the plantations, moving deep into remote forests and swamps to build heavily fortified settlements. And this resistance was led by incredible figures like Bencos Biojo, a true visionary who escaped from Cartagena and founded a legendary maroon settlement that became an impenetrable fortress of freedom. And the way they escaped? Probably one of the most breathtaking survival strategies in history. Fugitive slaves obviously didn't have paper maps, right? So they improvised. Women encoded geographic data, escape routes, and paths to water directly into the intricate patterns of their braided hairstyles. And it gets better. They actually hid seeds inside those braids so they could plant crops once they reached safety. They literally used these living maps to navigate the dangerous wilderness. The sheer genius of this is just astounding. So how did they keep this going? Section 5. Networks of survival, community, and culture. Once they were isolated in free towns like Palenque, they had to build entirely new, self-sustaining social systems without any colonial infrastructure. Enter the Cuadros. These are age-based communal support groups. Basically, from childhood, you belong to a Cuadro, and it acts as your lifelong safety net. If you need to build a house, your Cuadro helps you. If tragedy strikes, your Cuadro is right there. It was this unbreakable system that allowed the town to thrive in peace and manage its own society entirely without a police force. And they completely insulated their heritage. They actually cultivated their own unique language, Palenquero, which is the only Spanish Bantu Creole on Earth. The Spanish couldn't even understand them. They relied heavily on traditional herbal medicine to prevent diseases. They kept boxing alive, not just as a sport, but as a deep-rooted form of physical defense that actually led to world champions centuries later. And they preserved the Lumbaloo, a powerful 9-day funeral ritual, where the visceral beating of the tambor pichiche drum safely guides the souls of the departed back to Africa. Let's bring this all together in Section 6, A Living Legacy, the Modern Impact. Just look at this incredible timeline. It builds perfectly from a desperate escape into an internationally celebrated bastion of freedom. 1599, Bencos Biohau escaped slavery. By 1603, his forces are so formidable the Spanish literally have to sign a peace capitulation. 1713, a royal decree officially declares Palenque the very first free town in the Americas. And looking to modern times, in 2005, UNESCO officially recognizes Palenque as a masterpiece of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity. Talk about a full circle moment. There's this wonderful Palenquero phrase that captures the joy of that victory perfectly. Menino a Palenque acume, come to Palenque to eat. It represents a culture so remarkably preserved that their ancestral recipes, passed down largely by oral tradition and women in the community for centuries, recently won what is essentially the Oscar of global gastronomy in Beijing. The colonizers tried their hardest to erase them, and instead they are globally celebrated today. So I want to leave you with this final thought. If these cultures can survive centuries of displacement, brutal forced labor, and systematic colonial erasure, what does that teach us about the unbreakable nature of human resilience? As you leave today's explainer, I really hope you carry this with you. The colonial era was absolutely not a period of passive conquest. It was, and it remains, a massive, enduring testament to human ingenuity, brilliant strategy, and the absolute refusal to be erased. Thank you so much for learning with me today.